Welcome back to Old Testament Survey. This is your weekly intro video and review video. I normally have this out for you on Sunday nights. However, there was a big game last night, so I was distracted. I apologize for the lateness of this video. Hopefully, it will still be helpful to you as you get going on what you're working on this week. We're on the downward slope of the class. We're in week 5. And we're making our way through the narrative arc of the Old Testament. Of course, we began with the story of creation. We continued on through the call of Abraham. And then the really important story of Jacob, the call of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. And then that led us into the story of Moses and the Exodus, leaving the Exodus through the Red Sea and then going through the Jordan River as we entered into the season of conquest in the story of Joshua and Judges, the books that you reviewed last week. The end of the book of Judges, I should say, ends with this little phrase, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And it prefaces that with saying there was no king in Israel. And that little phrase sets up 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. And it also really, in a great way, sets up what we're going to be talking about, what you're going to be learning about, not just this week, but also in week 6. Now, it brings us back to the question that I introduced last week. Why was there a king in Israel? Why was there a need for a king in Israel? As a matter of fact, the book of Deuteronomy suggests that there shouldn't be one. The book of 1 Samuel and the character of Samuel himself really resists the idea of there being a king. I want to throw this word to you, and I think it'll be helpful. And this is also found in a PowerPoint presentation that's located in this week's section as well on King David. The word I want to share with you is accommodation. Kingship in Israel, naming Saul, David, Solomon, and the rest of them as kings in Israel, was an accommodation by God. God is working with Israel where they are, in their rebelliousness, in their stubbornness, in their recalcitrance, if you will. And with that, I want you to remember the story of Jacob. Jacob wrestles with an angel by the river, and he asks for a blessing. And in that wrestling match, he receives a blessing from the angel. You can read this in Genesis 32. He receives a blessing from the angel, and that blessing was 2 things, a wounded hip and a new name. And the new name was, of course, Israel. And that is the name from which the people of Israel, or the nation of Israel, is drawn. So Israel has this new name, and remember, the name of Israel means one who wrestles with God, or one who strives with God. And in the story of the kingship, we see this as clearly as we do anywhere else. So kingship in Israel is an accommodation. It is God going down and working with the people where they are. And we discover in 1 Samuel that there's 2 kinds of kings. There's King Saul, and he is representative of bad kings that follow on later on. King Saul looks good on paper. He was tall and handsome and powerful. He was the oldest in his family. And then there's the second kind of king. And this is the kind of king that I like to call the prototype. David is the prototypical king of Israel. What I mean by that is David is the kind of king that Israel is supposed to have throughout its history, but has just a few kings who are like him, a few good kings. Saul looks good on paper, but he fails. David does not look good on paper. He's short, he's small, he's the youngest in his family. He is not kingship material, but that is the one that God uses to bring about God's will among the people of Israel. Again, it is an accommodation. It may not be God's first plan, or plan A, if you will, but God is accommodating his plans to work with the people, to work with Israel, because Israel is God's chosen instrument to be a nation of priests, a holy nation, and a kingdom of priests to serve the world. One last thing you'll notice in the PowerPoint that's going to be right underneath this video in Moodle is towards the end of the PowerPoint, there's an illustration with a large arrow. And on that arrow, you'll see King David, King Solomon, and then the later kings. And then there are other words added to it. That arrow is a valuable resource, not just for this week, but for next week as well. It helps us understand the decline of the kingship in Israel. And it starts with the third king of Israel. It doesn't take very long for things to start to go south again. So look for the arrow illustration in this week's PowerPoint on King David. Now, as I wrap up, I want to mention two things to you. The first one is this. Pay attention to the writing project that I introduced last week. You can do either a movie review or a creative composition. This is going to be due the last week of class, so this is a great time to get working on them and get started on that material now. If you have any questions about them, first off, look at the instructions on the first section of Moodle, the creative composition and the movie review. You choose only one of those two to complete. If you have any questions after reviewing the material, feel free to call me and we'll talk about what you need to do for that assignment. And the second thing I want to end with, and this is just something I've noticed. I realized during the quizzes each week, most of you do great on the quizzes. There's a few of you who are struggling. My encouragement is read the assigned reading from Scripture that week. If you do that, you will probably do well on the quiz. This last week as I'm grading, I noticed something about Jael. There was a question about who killed Sisera. And of course, Sisera was killed by a young woman named Jael, Jael. In Hebrew, her name would probably be pronounced something like Yael. Yael. And some of you answered the question spelling her name Y-A-E-L. That's fine. You got credit for it if you spelled it correctly, Y-A-E-L, because that's how you will find it in various sources online. However, in our text, it's spelled with a J. And what this revealed to me is that a lot of you are relying on Googling the questions rather than doing the reading. Again, you're welcome to do that. But if you do the reading, not only are you going to do well on the quiz, but you're really going to learn the narrative, the story, the heart of the story of the Old Testament. So I urge you to keep up with your reading, and if you do so, you'll do well on the quiz. I hope you learn a lot this week. Contact me if you have any questions via email, or if you need to text or call, you may do that as well. All of that information, of course, is in Section 1 of Moodle. God bless you as you learn and grow this week.